The sun was setting over the dusty pews of St. Jude's when Kofi found it. Tucked beneath a worn hymnal was a leather-bound journal, its edges gilded in fading gold and smelling faintly of frankincense and rain. He shouldn't have opened it, but a strange tug in his spirit made his fingers tremble as he unlatched the brass clasp. Inside, the handwriting was elegant, looping like a river through a valley. The first page didn't start with a name or a date, but a desperate cry, "Lord, he is out there somewhere, walking the same earth I walk, breathing the same air. Protect his feet from stumbling before our paths finally cross." Kofi felt a chill race down his spine. He was a man of logic, an engineer who dealt in cold hard facts, but these words felt like a warm hand on his heart. He looked around the empty cathedral, wondering if the owner was still nearby, but only the flickering altar candles answered his gaze. That night, in his quiet apartment, the journal sat on Kofi's nightstand like a ticking bomb. He tried to pray his own prayers, but his mind kept drifting back to the woman who wrote with such raw honesty about her weight. Finally, he succumbed, opening to a middle page dated 3 years prior. "I am being pressured to marry the senator's son," she wrote. "They see his cars and his titles, but I see a hollow man. I told my father that I would rather wait for a man who loves God more than he loves himself, even if that man is a beggar." Kofi closed his eyes, his heart hammering. He had just turned down a lucrative but dishonest promotion the week before, a move that made his own family call him a fool. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel alone in his integrity. The next morning, Kofi returned to the church, asking the old caretaker about the woman who sat in the third pew. The caretaker, a man whose eyes held a century of secrets, merely smiled and shook his head. "Many daughters of Zion come here to weep and laugh, my son. God knows their names even if I do not." Kofi refused to give up. He began to notice small clues within the pages, mentions of a market by the red clay hills, and the sound of the school bell at noon. He realized she wasn't just a dreamer, she was a teacher, someone who poured herself into others while she waited for her own cup to be filled. He started visiting every school near the red clay hills, his heart leaping every time he saw a woman carrying books. He wasn't a stalker, he was a man searching for the other half of a conversation he had been having with God in his dreams. At a small community school, Kofi saw a woman standing under a flamboyant tree, her back to him. She was laughing, a sound like silver bells, and for a moment, the world stood still. He reached into his bag for the journal, his palms sweating, ready to ask the question that would change his life. Just as he stepped forward, a car swerved into the schoolyard, splashing mud onto his suit and blocking his path. By the time he wiped his eyes and the car had parked, the woman was gone, vanished into the sea of children running for the buses. He found a small violet ribbon on the ground where she had stood. He tucked it into the journal, right next to a page where she had written, "I felt a strange peace today, as if a prayer was walking toward me on 2 legs." Drama struck when Kofi's mother arrived at his house with a photograph of a suitable girl from their village. "Kofi, you are chasing ghosts and old paper," she scolded, throwing the photo on the table. "This girl is a doctor's daughter, beautiful and ready. Forget this obsession." The girl in the photo was indeed beautiful, but she lacked the depth Kofi had found in the ink-stained pages. He realized that the world was trying to force a good thing on him to keep him from the God thing. That night, he read a new entry that broke his heart, "My faith is wavering, Lord. My mother says I am too picky, that I am aging. Is the man I see in my spirit real, or am I just a girl in love with a ghost?" Kofi gripped the journal, whispering to the empty room, "I am real. Don't give up yet." Kofi began to write back, not on her pages, but in a notebook of his own. He matched her entries date for date, recording what he was doing while she was praying. When she wrote about a lonely Christmas, he realized he had spent that same night feeding the homeless, wondering where his wife was. The suspense of their parallel lives grew. He discovered she loved the smell of jasmine and hated the sound of thunder. He found himself buying a small bottle of jasmine oil, keeping it in his pocket like a talisman, a promise of a future he couldn't yet see. One rainy afternoon, he found a page that was wrinkled, as if by tears. "If I find him, I will know him by his peace," she had written. "He won't need to shout to be heard. His silence will be a sanctuary." Kofi's car broke down in a remote village 3 hours from the city. Frustrated and tired, he sought shelter in a small, humble chapel by the roadside. As he stepped inside to escape the downpour, he saw a woman kneeling at the altar, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He stayed in the back, not wanting to intrude on her sacred moment. She was praying aloud now, her voice thick with emotion. "Lord, I lost my journal, the one where I wrote my heart to you. It's foolish, but I feel like I've lost my map to him. Please, bring it back to me." Kofi's heart stopped. He reached into his bag, his fingers brushing the cool leather of the journal. This was it, the moment the ink would turn into flesh and blood. As he walked toward her, a tall, handsome man in an expensive suit entered through the side door. "Amara. I told you you'd be here," the man said, his voice booming and arrogant. He pulled the woman up from her knees, ignoring her tears. "Stop this religious nonsense. Your father has already agreed to our union." Amara, her name was Amara, looked at the man with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. "Mark, I told you I am waiting for a sign. My heart is not at peace with you." Mark laughed, a cold, metallic sound. "Peace doesn't pay the bills, Amara. Let's go." Kofi froze. If he stepped forward now, he would look like a stranger interfering in a domestic dispute. He watched, paralyzed, as Mark led her out into the rain. Kofi ran to the door, but their car was already speeding away, splashing through the red mud. He looked down at the journal in his hand and felt a surge of righteous anger. He wouldn't let a hollow man steal the woman who had been praying for him for years. He spent the next 3 days using every clue in the journal to find her father's house. He discovered she lived in a village known for its pottery, a detail she had mentioned in a poem on page 42. When he finally found the house with the blue gate and the jasmine bushes, his heart was in his throat. He knocked, not as a suitor with gold, but as a man with a message from God. Amara's father was a stern man with eyes like flint. "Another one?" he sighed, looking at Kofi's modest clothes. "If you are here for Amara, you are too late. The senator's son has brought the bride price, and we are celebrating tonight." Kofi didn't argue. He didn't boast of his engineering degree or his savings. He simply pulled out the journal and held it out. "I am not here to buy a wife, sir. I am here to return a soul. Please, just give this to your daughter." The old man frowned, looking at the book. He recognized it, he had seen his daughter clutching it for years. He took it slowly, his expression softening, and gestured for Kofi to wait under the flamboyant tree. Inside the house, Amara sat in her room, staring at the expensive jewelry Mark had given her. It felt like lead against her skin. When her father walked in and placed the journal on her lap, she let out a scream of pure joy. "Where did you find it?" she gasped, flipping through the pages. But she stopped when she saw something new. Tucked into the back was Kofi's notebook, the one where he had written his parallel life. She began to read, how he had turned down the dishonest promotion, how he had fed the homeless on the night she was lonely, how he had found her violet ribbon. Tears streamed down her face. "He's here," she whispered. "The man from the pages is here." Amara ran out of the house, but Mark was already there, blocking the path with his bodyguards. "What is this?" he demanded, snatching the journal from her hand. "You're crying over a dusty book while I offer you a kingdom?" Kofi stepped out from the shadows of the flamboyant tree. He was shorter than the bodyguards, but he stood with a quiet authority that made Mark hesitate. "That book doesn't belong to you," Kofi said softly. "And neither does she." Mark sneered, signaling his men. "Get this beggar out of my sight." But before they could move, Amara's father stepped forward, his cane thumping against the ground. "Enough. A man who steals a woman's peace can never be her husband. "Mark, take your gold and go." The bodyguards retreated at the old man's command, and Mark, red-faced with shame, drove away in a cloud of dust. Silence fell over the yard, broken only by the chirping of the evening crickets. Amara and Kofi stood 5 feet apart, the wait finally over. "You found the ribbon," she said, her voice trembling as she held up the small violet scrap. Kofi nodded, his heart finally finding its rhythm. "I found the ribbon, and I found the woman who prayed for my feet not to stumble." They talked until the stars came out, not about money or titles, but about the God who writes stories better than any human author. For the first time, Amara didn't have to explain her heart, she was talking to the man who already knew it by heart. Months later, the village gathered not for a wedding of wealth, but a wedding of witness. Kofi didn't bring a fleet of cars, he brought a new journal, its pages empty and white. At the altar, instead of traditional vows alone, they read to each other. "I am the man who was walking the same earth," Kofi promised, his voice steady. "And I will spend the rest of my life making sure your prayers are answered in the affirmative." Amara smiled, her veil catching the sunlight. "I don't need a map anymore," she replied. "Because every path I take now will be with you," toward him. The congregation roared with a joy that felt like heaven touching earth. As they drove away in a car decorated with jasmine flowers, Kofi looked at the old journal sitting on the dashboard. It was no longer a book of longing, but a book of testimony. He realized that their story wasn't just for them, it was for everyone still waiting in the silence. That night, Kofi sat at his desk and wrote the final entry in his own notebook. "To the one still reading, still waiting, and still praying, do not settle for the senator's son when God has a soulmate searching for you with a journal in his hand." He closed the book and looked at Amara, who is sitting close to the large window. The wait is over, but the adventure of a lifetime had just begun.